Right, because otherwise the vacancy would just stay that way until the next election.
Correct.
Whereas this way, the governor could make the appointment until the next election, at which point the appointee would have to stand for election.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
What about advice and consent of the Senate, like the U.S. Senate has at the federal level? Was there any discussion of that?
Thank heavens, no. What we did, I talked again in conference with Don. We thought that senatorial involvement on advice and consent would dilute the process, and it would put the governor in a difficult position from the standpoint of having to bargain with the Senate over appointees. And we felt that that would not enhance the judiciary, which was our intent in returning to gubernatorial appointments. And in order to, I think we felt that if we established a judicial commission to review the judicial article, that it would surely come to the same conclusions, especially if we could influence who the appointees were going to be.
Right.
So we got both houses of the legislature approved a resolution appropriating $50,000 to a commission to review the judicial article in its entirety. They came back with they were appointed. The executive director was a fellow by the name of Bill Booz, who had been a legislator, had been on the Judiciary Committee. He was a Democrat. I think maybe Tom Downs was on that commission. Maybe very prominent Republican lawyer, Larry Lindemeyer.
Larry Lindemeyer, former Republican state chairman.
Yes, and a wonderful gentleman and a very good friend. He and Tom Downs were, by the way, were election experts. Right. And represented their respective candidates across Michigan in various recounts. Right. And I had the pleasure of chairing a recount in the House in which they both participated. And by the way, the difference going into the election was 6 votes between the Republican and the Democrat. This was in the Charlotte district. And for the first time in modern memory, or anybody's memory, the Democrat was elected there by 6 votes.
That was Claude Burton, an Eaton County farmer, the squire of Squash Hill.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, okay.
wonderful old farmer.
Right, exactly.
Who wasn't sure why he was here and provided a lot of humor to both sides of the aisle. In that recount, the recount, he lost by 6 votes. Okay. And the Republican...
To Carol Newton, who was the incumbent Republican.
And a very fine legislator, by the way.
Then they had the recount.
Carol won by 6. We had the recount. I chaired the elections, that recount. And Claude Burton was the recount winner by 6 votes.
By 6 votes. So it was a swing of 12 votes.
Yes.
Wow.
And we came back with our report. Carol Newton got up, thanked the recount committee and the 2 counsel and the director of elections for the fairness. And he said, there's no question in my mind that I lost this election.
Wow.
What an outstanding gentleman he was.
I was going to say, you don't hear that anymore.
No.
Even when they know they've lost in the recount, nobody gets up and admits it.
But there was a standard of conduct that had developed over the years, and there was a certain sense of honor and integrity. And the most important thing was not winning, but how you conducted yourself.
Right.
And so it was still that gentlemanly approach.
Right. Let me ask you one other question. Did the state bar push to give themselves or the legal community the power to submit a list of candidates to a governor from which he was supposed to pick people to appoint to fill vacancies as judges? Was there an attempt to do that rather than give him a totally free hand? Because that's what they have in a lot of other states.
That's true. And that was strongly supported by the American Judiciary Committee, Jurisprudence Committee.
Right.
And it was promoted nationwide. It didn't fly. I don't know that anyone even proposed it.
It wasn't even a big issue.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
The whole focus was getting this back to the governor.
Right.
And
You also had to create, wasn't it 150 new district court judgeships in
Yes.
1968? So,
Yes.
I mean, that was a huge
Yes.
undertaking.
Now, Holbrook insisted in the proposed amendment that it preclude the governor from filling newly created judgeships. He worried, and by way of hindsight, I think it was I wasn't at first enthused about that. I wanted to give the governor as much authority in this area, even if it was Romney appointing 150 judges. Don's point was that's too much power for any one governor, and we ought not to do that. And so we included, at his request, and persuasive reasoning, and also to get 2/3 vote, we included language that precluded the governor from filling newly created vacancies. And the governor, under the 1908 language, the governor could do that.
Right.
So that's how all district judges had to stand for election.
Had to stand for election. Also, that phased out the old justice of the peace, didn't it?
It did indeed.
It brought them in. I mean, if they were lawyers and they wanted to be district judges, they had to run for office, right?
Yes.
To be district judges.
Yes.
Here's another issue that is with us still today, and that is compensation for legislators.
Yes.
The whole issue of legislative compensation found politicians between a rock and a hard place. They wanted to hike their salaries, but they didn't want the criticism from the news media and from the public if they did. And so you put a proposal on the ballot in 1968 to change that, the State Officers Compensation Commission. Tell us about all that.
Well, I was in charge on the Democrat side of the aisle, the Good and Welfare Program. And it was my responsibility to look after, as part of the quote-unquote modern legislature, at what pay levels should be established for the legislature. And when I was first elected, I think our pay was $5,000 plus $2,500 expenses, for a total of $7,500. My memory is you did not have to file an accounting of the $2,500, which seems kind of strange, but $7,500, even in 1963, was not very much money. And so one of my objectives was to increase legislative compensation. And one of the things that happened was we had a legislative pay raise, and we increased it by $5,000 in the House, sent it over to the Senate, and they promptly pigeonholed it because the governor said that was too much, even though they promised me they'd take it up and pass it. And we began at that point to negotiate with Bob Danhoff on a weekly basis. What would the governor do? Well, Danhoff made it clear that if the legislature would give careful thought to some of his legislative proposals, that there could be an accommodation on pay in which he would support. And so we met this was in the spring, and we met for several weeks on a weekly basis over in the old Roosevelt Hotel. And we came to an accommodation. And the governor would support $2,500. We made certain accommodations in terms of some legislation. And I felt that gave an unfair advantage to the governor in terms of legislation, and that kind of a hammer was absolutely inimical to the legislation being considered in a normal process. And I thought we must find a way around this issue. And also the newspapers, all the media, instantly pounced on the legislature as quote, raising their own salaries, fixing their own salaries, because there was no other way to do it. And I checked on the history of legislative pay raises, and every one of them was strongly opposed by the media. So a little bit of time went by, and in giving it consideration, how do we fix this? It became clear to me you need